Okay, well, I think you have all received the introductions and the descriptions of our panelists. I will quickly reiterate. We have Brendan Benzing from Rhapsody, and to his left, Gigi Sohn from public interest group Public Knowledge, Jeff Toig from Move Music, which is part of Cricket Communications, and an artist, a real-life artist, Aaron McKeown, who can talk about some of the policy issues behind this really quickly evolving and interesting space of mobile music. And I want to reiterate how quick and fast some of these changes are taking place. Just an hour ago, it was announced that Napster was purchased by Rhapsody from Best Buy. Move Music is really a new service that was launched by Cricket, and it built in-house. It very quickly accumulated 200,000 subscribers. You all heard of I'm sure followed the announcement of Amazon and his launch of the tablet. Facebook now has a partnership with the music service called Spotify. The business relationships that are taking place and the business deals in the conference rooms across the country are really making some really disruptive changes to the industry and affecting you as artists, as policymakers, and as companies. And so I thought we'd try to tackle that beast of a question of what's going on and start off with some of the business trends that are going on. It seems that what you're seeing is lots of different deals, lots of different partnerships. Some might even describe them as sort of walled gardens that are being created. Amazon wants you to buy their tablet so that you access their music. Maybe I wanted to start off with Jeff and Brendan, if we could, so the corporate gurus here, and talk a little bit about how you see the space evolving. Is that going to be the case that you're seeing new and innovative or different types of partnerships evolve? And maybe actually, Jeff, you can start off and talk a little bit about Move, which is sort of a new model for the internet service provider and the wireless internet service providers. How you guys took off and where you see the space going.
Yeah, thanks. We stand between you guys and I think cocktails, so we'll try to be interesting. If you're not familiar with Move, it's one of the fastest growing new digital music services in the world. We launched just a few months ago, have over 200,000 customers. And the innovation around the product idea really takes two forms. One is a business model innovation, where for the first time, unlimited full track song downloads, unlimited ringtones, and unlimited ringback tones are included in your wireless plan. And so Cricket, the wireless carrier, for $55 a month, gives customers unlimited nationwide talk, text, web, and music. And that is a unique new product idea where to the consumer, music is just hard bundled, it's included, it feels free, and on the back end, the music industry gets paid, artists, publishers, and the entire ecosystem is in the revenue stream and gets paid per subscriber per month, and is in this unique new annuity business where you're building a subscriber base and then creating a revenue stream over time around that subscriber base. The second part is technology innovation, and Move Music is a state-of-the-art digital music platform that was specifically architected for mobile. And so everything that we did really oriented around mobile music consumption on the phone and delivery of music over the wireless network to the phone. And that in and of itself is different than the orientation many of the other players in the market who have great technologies, but really focus them on the computer first and then port to the phone as an app have taken. And so we've taken a very different approach. It's really gaining traction in the marketplace, and we think that ultimately it's really quite good for consumers who get music included in their wireless service, and it's great for the music industry because it really creates an opportunity to develop a very large-scale subscriber base that's monetizable back to the industry, and that's a real positive way to replace a lot of the lost revenue that the industry's seen. So that's a quick overview on Move.
And where do you see the market heading? Do you see bundling of this sort that's sort of different music with an internet service that you pay up front. Is that the future, these kinds of relationships? Can you, in the future, just buy your music separately? What does this mean from?
Well, it's the beauty of this industry is that the future will take many forms, and there are different segments of the market for whom different services really apply. There's a segment for whom iTunes really meets their need and does a phenomenal job of doing that. But there's a very large segment of the market whose needs aren't being met by Apple and Google, by Amazon, by Spotify or others. And so, we believe that there's a very large segment of the market that is going to experience music with legal music services, meaningful legal music services that can create significant subscriber scale. And we think that those are going to evolve in really thoughtful ways against different segments than the current players are targeting. So yeah, I think it'll take different shapes. Existing players will continue to serve the customers that they serve, but new services like ours with new models and new innovative ideas on how you deliver new products and services to segments that are underserved really probably create a unique opportunity to grow new revenue streams that hadn't existed before.
And Brandon, when you look at some of these big announcements coming out, tomorrow Apple will announce, surely its next iPhone, Amazon's announcement last week, the week before that, Facebook, everything is sort of indirectly but very much directly related to the business of digital media. How do you see your business going forward with these giants that seem to be sort of really taking over the space in some ways?
Yeah, if you look at Rhapsody, Rhapsody's been around a long time and was really the original cloud-based music service and has been around almost a decade. If you go back to the early days in the last decade, really, Rhapsody wasn't even able to operate with a lot of those the most popular mobile music devices of the time. That has fundamentally changed in the last few years. So now many of our mobile customers are actually on the Apple platform. So one of the trends we're seeing is that even large companies like Apple or Google or Android, some of these other entities, and even Microsoft, who we essentially compete with because they have a Zune music service that's integrated right into their phones, is that we can still participate. And one of the things that we think that's different than a lot of those other services is there seems to be this sense of, you're going to stay within the Apple family, or you stay within the Android family, or you stay within the Microsoft family as they try to create integration into Xbox and other elements of their software, whereas we see ourselves as playing that more broader role of going across all platforms. So we're on over 70 different internet-connected devices. And so we think there's always going to be room for some consumers who are there, they're going to kind of pick and choose the best of breed products and services. And for us, we offer something unique to then almost all the other players out there. And we think that because of that, there will be a certain segment of the market that this will be a very appealing service. And as the largest on-demand music provider in the United States, and obviously acquiring Napster today makes us even larger, but we think that the model is still somewhat ahead of its time. Most people grew up in this room probably buying music and not paying for a subscription model against it, and that's a difficult thing for consumers to overcome. My child's 1.5. He'll probably never buy music. He'll probably end up doing some kind of subscription service 10 years from now. And that concept of where music comes with other devices or comes with other services, as you just heard Jeff talk about, it is something I think that is going to really make this more of a mass market product. We've recently announced a deal with Metro PCS that is really reaching a segment of the market that we haven't been able to reach before because we've been a credit card-based service, and many people, believe it or not, who use their Metro PCS are actually a cash-based service provider, and they're coming in and paying their bills month to month. So we have an opportunity to reach them, and to your point, that's through partnership. And we feel that there's a great opportunity to distribute content through partners, and there's room for lots of players in the music business because music is so universal.
So it's so dizzying, all the different options that you talk about, and it's presented in a way that it's lots of opportunities. Gigi, can you talk a little bit from the consumer's perspective? What comes to mind? Are there any concerns of all these partnerships that are developing? Certainly walled gardens, it seems, as well. and what's happening in the telecom space that consumers should be mindful of?
Yeah, I guess my concerns are mostly around the gatekeepers. I mean, we're talking about Metro PCS and Cricket, who are sort of the two, two carriers that are, serving discrete markets, lower income markets, but we're not hearing about what AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and hopefully T-Mobile, if it survives, and if we have anything to say about it, it will survive, are doing. And it's really, I love what these guys are doing, but it's really what the big two are doing, AT&T and Verizon, were not doing that really concerns me. And some of the policy issues that I think play into whether Brendan can expand his business or if Move becomes something more than just what Cricket sells is obviously what's going on around net neutrality. I'm going to assume that most people know what I'm talking about when I talk about net neutrality. If you don't, raise your hand and I'll explain it. Oh, good. Nobody wants to raise their hand.
It's a very informed audience.
Great. So, but for those of you who might not know all the details, the net neutrality rules have finally been published. It's going to court. But what's critical for this mobile space is that the same rules, different rules apply to wireless, to mobile wireless than do to wired or fixed wireless. Now, why is that important? So if you are a Rhapsody and you want, to get carriage on, on all the wireless providers, under the new net neutrality rules, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, any of the carriers can favor another music service over yours. There is no non-discrimination requirement. The carriers can actually block applications. They cannot block websites. But to the extent that many applications don't go to websites or aren't websites themselves, that gives them a lot of latitude to favor certain partners. So I would say, perhaps the number one issue with regard to whether these services can expand beyond the lower cost services that they're on is net neutrality. And we are a long way from knowing what the fate of net neutrality is going to be, just because it's going to be wrapped up in the courts, first procedurally, and I'm not going to get into that unless anybody really, really cares, and then substantively for quite some time. The other two issues I want to mention very briefly is I also assume this savvy audience knows that AT&T is trying to buy T-Mobile. If that were the case, then AT&T and Verizon would control 80% of the market, and that is really bad for Cricket and really bad for Metro PCS.
And can I just ask,
Yeah, sure.
What is your market share for Cricket and for, well, this, I guess it's prepaid, so it's not in the same pool, right? You're not in the same sandbox?
Yeah, Cricket as a carrier has about 6 million customers, a little less than 6 million customers, and it's, market share in the markets where it competes in prepaid is healthy, but it's, compared to the big guys.
The big guys have like 140 million customers. I mean, you can't compare.
Compete?
It's
Verizon and
incomparable.
AT&T each have about 90 million plus right now.
Right.
And
So-
with the merger, it'd be 130 million, I believe, AT&T and T-Mobile.
Yeah. So if you look at industries like the airline industry, the oil industry, the auto industry, the concentration of the top two there is about 35%. So this would more than double it. I mean, it's just striking. So it kind of makes me laugh to the extent they ever laugh about these things that, AT&T was so shocked that the Justice Department has sued to block the merger because to put 80% of the market in those two carriers would just be remarkable. And obviously that's tied up in the courts as well. But I give our chances of winning quite good. I know AT&T is going to try to propose some big grand settlement. But my organization does not believe that any settlement would be possible that would limit the damage to competition, consumer choice, prices that would happen. And I don't know if people heard, but today T-Mobile announced a $30 plan that has 5 gigs of data, 100 voice minutes, and unlimited text. So they really, to their credit, they're continuing to be a maverick in this space and offer really low-priced plans. One last thing, and I will say it shortly, but I hope we do get a chance to expand on it, are the increasing use by the larger carriers, again, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile to a lesser extent, and also on the wired side, Comcast and AT&T, of so-called data caps. So data caps are limits on the amount of data you can use over your connection before bad things start to happen. And those bad things can range from an extra $10 for every extra gig that you use, gigabyte that you use, to slowing of speeds, that's what T-Mobile does, to, in Comcast's case, actually disconnecting you. And in Comcast's case, if you go over the cap 2 months in a row, you get disconnected for a year. So I think this has huge implications for streaming services like Spotify and Pandora, and just huge implications for consumers generally. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to me that somebody providing a service would say, please use less of it. It's like as if you went into a grocery store and they said, no, don't buy the meat and the fish and the eggs, just buy milk and juice and leave the store. It's amazing that any business works this way, but when you have a very concentrated market, you can do things like that.
So just to review, those 2 or 3 issues that Gigi just brought up, data caps right now are not really on any agenda at the FCC. So this is just a real sort of from the ground up concern from consumers. Net neutrality, as she said, is right now in court. Or it's going to be, yeah.
No,
Verizon filed the lawsuit.
No, Verizon filed and Free Press filed.
Free Press filed.
Free Press actually filed on behalf of its members in a district court, a court of appeals in Massachusetts, saying that it was arbitrary for the FCC to treat wireless and wireline differently.
So Erin McGeown, I'd like, I think everybody, these are concerns from the consumer side, from the artist side. What are you actually seeing? Do you find that your work is just not being discovered, or you're not getting the placement you need? What does it mean sort of from your side, and Cam?
A couple of notes that I wrote here just listening. In terms of like artists' concern in the mobile space, let's see if I can sort of condense them and answer your question at the same time. I think artists, I'm glad that Gigi brought up net neutrality. I mean, I think that's the operative word here as far as artist concerns go, and that's something that I've been really involved with. And I can give you 2 seconds on why artists care about net neutrality,
sure.
Or maybe, in terms of artists, it's a gatekeeper problem for us. It is, especially for me as an independent artist, it's a question of getting my content to able to compete with the content that is supported by larger media players. And, to preserve that type of thing is a quick answer of why it's important to artists. But in terms of what we've heard so far, I mean, I have access to Rhapsody through TuneCore. And I get paid pretty fairly, and I get paid regularly from Rhapsody, and I make a good amount of, and all my records are up on there. And so Rhapsody, for example, is a service that I have access to as an independent artist. I'm curious how you guys are creating your music that's offered, or curating the music that's offered to your customers. And I'd be concerned, again, as like, are you going to have a deal with TuneCore so that an independent artist can get on Cricket service? That'd be a concern for me. And then Gigi also mentioned that, the thing about dividing the mobile space and the wired space, just from like a social justice perspective, like we do know that the mobile space is used by certain communities, that it's just really important to be looking at that space. And it's not a surprise to me that someone's like, okay, you can have the wired space, and we're gonna, now mess around on you in the wireless space. And that to connect that with a social justice perspective, I think I just want to put that out there and say that's important. And I guess I don't know. I'll stop there.
Oh, great.
Did that answer your question somewhat?
Sure. I mean, do you want Jeff to try to answer your question?
I'd love to hear an answer to that. Yeah.
Which question?
How are you curating the music that's available for your subscribers? Where are you getting it from? And also, if I'm understanding what you're offering correctly, it's a flat fee bundle for access to this catalog you're curating. And then how are individual artists paid?
Yeah. So we today, in terms of the offer, it's one flat price you pay for your wireless service, and you get unlimited music included. And so there's a percentage of revenue that's set aside per subscriber per month that's paid back to the labels and to the publishers who represent artists and writers. And so that revenue pool gets allocated based on usage within the service.
How do I get on your service?
We'd love to have you on our service. No, today, we just launched a few months ago, and we launched with the four major labels, Universal, Sony, Warner, and EMI. We're in the process of ingesting indie label content. So if you have a relationship with indie content aggregators, like I think there are 3 or 4 that we've got deals with who are bringing us millions of tracks, your content will come. And if it's sort of individual one-off artist relationships with us, we don't have a mechanism to do that yet, but it's something that we're looking into. So.
Thanks, Aaron. On net neutrality, this panel is about wireless, but we're talking about net neutrality. It doesn't apply to wireless. So
it applies to wireless. It just applies in a much lesser form.
In a much less form. Jeff and Brendan, what are your thoughts on net neutrality and sort of making sure, from your point of view, what do you support and what do you not?
From a business perspective, I mean, we have relationships with companies like Verizon, for example, and their business relationships for distribution and partnerships and things like that. So we just try to operate within the environment, and the environment right now, at least in the wireless space, is there's a lot of concern around data usage, period, whether you're a consumer or a carrier. And those concerns are different. Some of them are about the cost issues and the fear factor associated with the metered rate that then kind of explodes and you hit a cap. Or they're around fears around even just things like if you're streaming and using a lot of bandwidth, it actually depletes the battery faster, for example, on your phone. Mm-hmm. So from a product perspective and a business perspective, we're operating in an environment where we're trying to optimize our products and services in terms of how much bandwidth they use. And we're obviously incented to do that on behalf of the consumers and often on behalf of the carriers. So from a product perspective, we try to build products that really have a lower footprint, if you will, when it comes time to consume bandwidth. But not every company can do that given their rights and licensing, for example. Like we have the ability for you to download music and then play it back locally from your device. We call that offline playback. It's similar to what Jeff is doing as well. And that is of interest to a lot of companies and carriers who would rather promote those types of services that are going to be, more considered around the use of the network on behalf of their customers. So from that perspective, that is an environment that we operate in that, we're not waiting for public policy or anything to change. We're trying to strike business deals. The one thing I will say is most of the carriers are a lot more open than they were 3 or 5 years ago. When most of the relationships were exclusive, the platforms were very closed. You referenced walled gardens. Those environments very much have changed really in the last 3 to 4 years, and I think it's improved the consumer experience. It's probably in some ways complicated it, and many consumers are probably challenged to deal with it, and carriers are probably dealing with more customer care calls than they ever have. But the capabilities are much greater than they were 4 or 5 years ago, where I would argue most of the environments were very closed.
And I would say that that's due to the pressure from, thanks to folks like you guys, and also pressure brought on by Google and Android, for sure. I just want to make one thing clear, and I think this is really, really important. Data caps have really little to do with network congestion. I mean, network congestion is something that happens in a place and time, right? The network operates differently at 4 in the morning than it does at 8 o'clock at night. Data caps are a very, very blunt instrument, right? It's like you've got your cap, it operates every minute of every day, whereas, we don't have a problem if a network is congested for the operator to throttle back high bandwidth users at that time. Okay, but data caps doesn't do that. Data caps is just like flat out, you can only use this much, even if you're using it at 4 in the morning. Now, I talked about a guy that I talked about how Comcast will kick you off the network if you go over their 250 gigabyte cap, which they've had now for 4 years. They kicked them off for exceeding that data cap. 2 months in a row. Well, what was he doing? Was he, you know, downloading movies illegally on peer-to-peer networks? No. He was backing up his files to a cloud service. So he was doing something perfectly legal, perfectly legitimate, and it had nothing to do with congestion. He just went over his cap and he was done. So I think it's really important because you hear a lot about, oh, these bandwidth hogs, and we're only trying to stop bandwidth hogs. Well, this guy was not a bandwidth hog. He was doing what we all should be doing, backing up our files.
Just one, regardless of your view on net neutrality, the challenge carriers have is that the asset's finite, and there's only so much of it, and it can only take so much data over the network in order. I mean, at a certain point, if consumers continue to use more and more data and heavier data, it's going to tax the network, and performance either won't be as good or the network won't be able to support subscriber growth. And so that the hot topic aside, that's, I think, from a carrier standpoint, that tends to be the concern. Because you ultimately are responsible for quality of service to your customer base. The opportunity for content companies like Move, Rhapsody, and others is that we have to figure out really good technology solutions that help through the challenge of capacity issues on wireless networks. And you know, I'll give an example. What we did with Move Music was streaming services. We want customers to use it a lot. It's unlimited for a reason. We want them to get it as part of their service. We want them to use it a ton. We want them to engage with all the different parts of it. We want them to love it. We want them to build a deep relationship for Cricket and for Move. And we ultimately want it to be a really important experience in their life. But if a customer is going to use 2 to 3 hours is going to listen to music on their phone 2 to 3 hours a day, which is what our Move Music customers do today. And all of that content is streaming over the network. It's somewhere between 3 and 5 gigabytes of data usage a month. And that is very heavy on any wireless network. And so what we did, recognizing that the business goal to serve the consumer was a great experience that they could use a lot, was that we didn't build a streaming service, we built a download service. So content is encoded at a rate that, and uses a codec that compresses the files small enough to get them over the network fast, but on the other side for the consumer has CD quality audio. And so you're solving the consumer's problem of great audio quality, but you're solving the network problem of how do you get a file over the network fast without using too much bandwidth. And so our customers listen to 2 to 3 hours of music a day, but they download 400 songs a month. And that's only 400 megabytes of data usage on the network a month. But with a streaming service, if you're streaming Pandora for 2 to 3 hours a day, you would use 3 to 5 gigabytes of data. And so it's incumbent on technology companies to think differently about their solutions, given that for any operator anywhere in the world, you're gonna struggle given the capacity constraints that the network has, which is just a fact.
Well, Sprint seems to have figured it out. I mean, one of the things I think troubles us, and I would refer folks to a great paper that was written by my colleague Mike Weinberg, who's up there. It's something like data caps plus 4G equals magic beans. Because you're told about how great 4G networks are, right, and super fast speeds. But if you were to watch video streaming, not download, it would be worse if it was download, stream video on 4G at the fastest advertised speed, you'd hit your cap, this is the 2 gigabyte cap, in 22 minutes. I mean, you could download half a movie. Right? That is not what you're being sold. We're not against caps entirely, but they have to have some rational basis. And quite honestly, $10 extra for each gigabyte, you know, you could rack up incredible charges. And I think this is what is going to happen, okay? Because people will buy the hype. They'll start watching video on the go, or they'll stream Spotify or Pandora. And they'll start getting, $1,000 overage charges, well, and then it'll be. But I don't agree with you about this finite resource. Again, there are ways to manage your network at times of congestion. The network isn't always congested, and data caps just are a flat-out, if not prohibition, punishment for using the network a certain amount.
We'll have to come back to bandwidth. I hear some barking in the, the audience. But let me, Brendan, do you foresee consumers moving more to downloads than streaming, given the reality of caps?
Well, yeah, I think there's a room for both. And I think, our company and others are taking advantage of, looking at the landscape and saying, how do you optimize it for this period? And that period could be a high congestion period, it could be a low traffic time. And how do you take advantage of all those capabilities? So things like we can build into our service, automatic downloading features that perhaps only download when you're connected to Wi-Fi, right, which is essentially an off-road from the wireless network to the landline networks. And so I think from that perspective, you really want to be able to offer a hybrid service. That's challenging for some of the companies that only offer streaming services like Pandora or iHeartRadio or some of those entities. But I anticipate that we'll probably see an evolution to some more hybrid models from them as well, where more music can be stored and played back, more of a DVR model, as a way to try to manage network consumption. And
to be sure, Jeff, right now Move or Cricket doesn't offer Wi-Fi capabilities on your phones. It's all 3G.
Yeah, right now we deliver music over the 3G network. Okay. We've got Wi-Fi for Android launching in a few months.
Okay, yep. So you can now play. I don't know. I feel so eager to get to the audience uproar about capacity. But well, why don't we start opening it for questions? I'm sure that unless you guys want to, does anybody want to weigh in on some of the thoughts here so far? No? Okay. Why don't we take some questions? There's an eager question right here from the gentleman, the blue sweater. We'll get you out by right now.
Hi, Steve Easley, Easley Management. I manage artists, but I also happen to be general counsel of a company that builds cellular towers. I'm also set to acquire some time-dependent pricing software to help manage wireless networks. And the gentleman earlier today talked about being a lefty. Well, I'm a McGovern liberal. And so, Ms. Sohn, whereas I agree with you in spirit, I can absolutely assure you there are incredible limitations on wireless operators. And because of that, net neutrality needs to take it has to acknowledge the fact that they aren't creating any more bandwidth. Carriers are seriously bandwidth limited, and with the building that's going on of antenna sites and stuff is incredible. Just to manage the lowest estimate we have is the growth of 750% over the next 3 years in data usage. So you've got to. I applaud both Brendan and Jeff, who seem to have realized technological solutions are necessary. And if that, from a public policy viewpoint, maybe what we need to do is work on the record label so that you can store and do that in off-peak hours in order to solve these bandwidth limitations, because building networks that'll work is very, very difficult.
Can I just respond? Let me just respond to that. So, what's built into the network neutrality rules, and which we agree with, is that a network provider, be it wired or wireless, should be able to reasonably manage their networks, okay? And taking into account the technological limitations, we're fine with that. But that's different than saying, well, Spotify is going to get the highest quality, is going to pay me, the carrier, for the highest quality of service, and so it's, faster, uploads than Pandora. Pandora, we're just not going to, you can't even pay us enough. So there's a difference between discriminating between content applications and service providers and managing your network to make sure it runs efficiently and that people get, a certain level of quality of service. So, like I said, I get it. I get it that wireless providers have, different technological needs and restrictions on wired providers, but that's not the same as saying you can favor particular services when they pay you to do so. It's a completely different animal.
Next question. Down here.
I have a question for Jeff. I know you said that you set aside a portion of your revenue for the artists. Can you tell us what that portion is, and more important, how much of that actually goes to an artist? Do you have like a per stream rate? I've heard, you know, it's been written that the streaming services are turning analog dollars into digital pennies. So I'm just wondering where you fall along that line.
Yeah, I can't share the exact per subscriber per month rate. We've not made that public. But what's that? Yeah, well, but it's, I mean, it's gotten the support of all of the major record labels. Yeah. Now I really can't help you. Yeah. So I mean, look, we pay the labels, and we expect that the labels are paying the artists. I will say that, you know, it's not an insignificant portion of revenue, and as the subscriber base scales, it's a very meaningful number in terms of the revenue that gets paid back to the industry. That's the idea behind this model. In a world where you're you know, getting some portion of $1.29 or 99 cents a download, that a la carte transaction-based model, we believe in the long run, is a less attractive economic model than a subscription model where you have an annuity that the industry participates in. And the beauty of this is that the wireless revenue stream is something people are paying for anyways, and they're going to pay for and not be able to live without. So if the music industry has a piece of revenue in a wireless monthly revenue stream that every customer everywhere in the world is going to have and going to have, you can see how at scale, even at small amounts of revenue at scale, 1 million, 10 million, hundreds of millions of customers, this can become a very interesting annuity revenue business for artists and for the industry. And that's what is, we believe, revolutionary about this model, if we can prove it and ultimately scale it in the US and around the world, which is what we hope to do.
And Aaron, what's your reaction to that? I mean, when you hear that as an independent artist, are you hopeful? Are you thinking,
I'm not very
will I
hopeful.
ever see any cash?
No, I feel frustrated. I feel frustrated listening to that. I'm sitting here thinking about how can I bring the word power structure into this conversation, because I just kind of feel like this conversation that we're having is like, it's just reminding me, I was trying to talk this out earlier in the day with some other folks, but like it's just reminding me that like every time we have a piece of new technology in the music industry, like the major power players figure out a way to absorb it and control it. And so you have that with with radio, then you have it with like a jukebox, then you have it with, you know, the cassette deck. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and this just feels like that to me. It just feels like a way that people who already have money and power are finding a way to absorb this new technology in a way that continues for me to feel like, how am I going to get paid, and how...
And all the changes that are sweeping the industry right now, these big announcements from the biggest players, that feeds into what you're talking about?
I guess so. It just feels like that. I mean, I am, you know, not a huge artist, but I'm not a small artist. Like, my scale is, I have some scale, you know, to what I'm doing. But, you know, it's still not enough to be of concern to Cricket. Excuse me. But, and not, but... You know, I still have, and I think this is the overarching question of this conference, is, you know, how do people pay rent? And there's a really fabulous chart. I can give someone the link or put it up. I'll put it up on my Twitter when I finish here. That shows you how many streams. It's from a UK publication. It shows you how many streams per month at current rates an artist has to sell or have someone download to make a US minimum wage, a solo artist. And it goes from a tiny dot of how many records you have to sell to about to how many Spotify streams you have to have a month. And so you can see on your screen, you see the one dot of how many records you sell if you're an independent artist replicating your own records to Spotify, and the Spotify dot doesn't fit on your stream. On your screen, do you know what I'm saying? And so no one here is addressing that part of it. And again, My fear, concern, frustration is that it's just kind of more of the same of people who have power continuing to take power.
Jeff, do you want to respond, or should I take another question?
No, I was actually going to ask you a question. So what's the model that would work? Because I can tell you, we are actually trying to do right by the industry through this model. It's the idea came out of an opportunity to serve a segment of the market that's completely unserved, that isn't buying music at all, not on iTunes, not on Rhapsody or Napster or Spotify, isn't signed up to a music subscription. The revenue that the amount of money they pay annually per subscriber for a massive segment of the US population and globally is like in the tens of dollars. And so what we're trying to do is to create a model that actually creates a legal digital music economy for a segment of the market that is predominantly downloading music illegally, maybe going into used CD stores and buying CDs there. We're trying to bring a legal digital music ecosystem to that segment to give them the feeling that music's free because it's included in a wireless plan, but to actually compensate the industry. And I think it's one thing to say that the model doesn't work because we don't know if it's going to work. We hope that it works. If it doesn't work, it's just another model where people are actually trying to help the industry and it's not helpable. So that's one issue. The other issue is, hey, if you like the model, how do you make sure that independent artists have a way to be fairly compensated within the model? So I just think they're two separate issues. And I just want to make sure that we're not mixing the issues because this is the kind of model that could be very meaningful to the industry if it's successful. And if it scales and it's successful, it could transform the industry. I think the question of how do we make sure that independent artists are fairly compensated in the model, assuming that it works, is a very fair question. But if you don't like the model, I'd love to know what other models you'd like. And if you like the model but want to make sure you get your fair cut, that's a very reasonable point of view, and we have to figure that out.
Yeah, well, I think two things. I mean, I think you're right. I'll agree with you. It's two separate questions. No, I do not have the exact answer for you of what would be. I agree with you. Like, of most immediate concern is how do we make the current model or what is currently happening fair to not just independent artists, to all artists. Regardless, artists with a capital A. I just in terms of like a separate thing, as far as an answer goes, I mean, I think this is a bigger question than the music industry. I think this is an economic question as we live in this world now, which is how do we pay everyone fairly? Do you know what I'm saying? Not just artists. And so let's think about that as a bigger question than just people who are trying to make money from music.
Well, this has been a great conversation that's sort of covered a lot of areas. I don't want to end it without giving you all a chance to, and I'm sorry we can't take any more questions. Can you just, in like 10 seconds, each of you, name some company, a person, just some advice for our audience. Who is the most disruptive? What is the most disruptive technology, person, company out there that everybody should be paying attention to? Let's start off with Brendan.
Rhapsody, of course.
Except your own company.
If you say Move, I'll say Rhapsody.
That can be helpful to people here.
He'd have to say it first, of course.
I want you to do it first. I want you to do it first.
No, look, Apple is clearly one of the most innovative companies, and they've been recognized time and time for that. I would say Apple is, but there's a lot of new startup companies, some of the ones that we even saw previously here that are really focused on this sector specifically, that we just saw in the pitch right before the panel, 2 panels before this one. So, I don't think innovation in this country is around technology and specifically around the music industry is stalled by any means. Rhapsody, I've only been with the company just going on 2 years, but it's been around a decade, and 4 new music startups have come in to directly compete with us. That's pretty significant investment that's coming from venture capitalists to invest in the music industry. And, you know, it's a little bit shocking given how difficult this industry is, all the way up and down the value chain, whether you're a label or an artist or a distributor like us. So, you know, I think there's lots of little innovation happening. So, you know, sorry for the long answer, but just being put on the spot.
I sprung it on you. I sprung it. And so, Gigi, would it be data caps would be the most disruptive?
I mean, no, I was going to say that basically probably the most disruptive companies we haven't heard of yet. I'll agree with Brendan in that regard, but I will say that if we don't get net neutrality right, if we don't get data caps right, and we don't get industry concentration right, we may never hear of them because they'll never have a chance. It's like the independent artists. You'll never get a chance if we allow the mobile space, which is the biggest growing space and is the space that is most important to communities of color, to lower economic communities, if we allow that to be a more closed system than the wired space.
Right. Jeff, what's the one thing that everybody should pay attention in this space?
Whatever she says.
All right, you're on, Aaron. You're answering for two.
I would just point people to Cash Music. You should check them out. Open source tools for artists.
Thank you so much. I think some of our panelists have to start out of here, but others might be able to stick around and chat some more. Thank you.